is India still rising? First of all, Modi took office, and first he went to Japan, China, and Brazil. No prime minister had ever gone to foreign countries in his first 3 weeks in office. And he announced a few weeks later a new foreign policy for India. It was that India would no longer just be a balancing factor in global diplomacy, it would be a promoter of initiatives in global diplomacy. He introduced what seems a very simple idea, which was that every Indian should have a bank account. Now, in our country, nobody cares about that because everybody has bank accounts, too many often. But in India, it's not true because Indians don't trust banks. They save on their arms, gold under their mattress, wherever. They do not use banks. So the penetration rate of banks is very low in India. Now, what he meant by a bank account was not a normal bank account where an amount of money is sent electronically and received almost immediately, and it is the same amount. You're addressing a problem which for generations in India has been a real problem and has undercut trust in banks, namely Indians working in urban India, transferring money to family in rural India, were constantly being ripped off. The different amounts of money would arrive, cash would be taken out, cash changed hands. It was a very awkward system, so there was a lack of any kind of confidence in the distribution system. And yet people had to transfer money to relatives because there's great distances involved. And frankly, they had a bad experience for generations, not just shortly, but for generations. So here was an idea that would allow a family or a person working in urban India to transfer an amount of money and be assured that it got there. Very big idea. Secondly, he made the same decision on the transfer of monies for the gigantic distribution of subsidies in India, government subsidies. He announced that they were going to be transferred electronically and not in the form of cash, where, according to the figures, 30 to 35% of those transfers of subsidies were leaking, being lost or taken by corrupt players in the system. And people had said when he was elected, well, he's going to have to kick the teeth in of his people who elected him, the rural farmers, by cutting their subsidies. He didn't do that. He instead addressed the question of leakage in the system, which helped the fiscal accounts and didn't cut the subsidy of the recipient, but improved the delivery of that money. Now, there's a third part of this, and that is that he announced that there was going to be licenses given for this activity. And the licenses were distributed, and some banks applied and won a license. But who also won a license were two of the big telecom companies. So why did they want a license? Because they could see that in this system, the simple primitive handset wasn't going to serve anymore. They would need to develop more complex and sophisticated handsets to allow people to do things online. And this is a way to overcome the distances and the infrastructure difficulties of India. And it was, in my view, a brilliant idea which will promote, and is promoting already, the development of e-commerce in India. And this raises a very interesting point. I was in India about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I was speaking to one of the companies that is engaged in this, and I said to them, how does it work when you have a 45% literacy rate in many parts of India to use a more sophisticated handset? Because he was talking about how there was training going from the top down and so on. I said, what about all these illiterate people? What happens to more sophisticated handset use? And the answer was striking. He said, you'd be surprised that people who are illiterate are able to use that kind of a handset as effectively as anybody else. They overcome the literacy difficulties by learning how to use the functions on the handset. So, this is a revolutionary breakthrough, because it means that India will be going online much faster than anybody would have expected. And that is indeed what's happening.